Welcome to AI for You. Today's use case focuses on using AI for strategic content gap analysis across your institution's digital channels. Many higher education marketers struggle to align their content output with institutional priorities, often discovering misalignment only after significant time and resources have been invested. Export data from your social media content performance, your blog posts, and other content into spreadsheets, and then feed those into an AI tool along with your institution's strategic priorities, brand values, and target audience profiles. Then ask AI, using the prompt in the show notes, to categorize your content by theme, analyze alignment with stated priorities, and identify gaps between what you're publishing and what your institution wants to be known for. In this episode, we explore strategic AI implementation with Kyle Campbell, the founder and managing director of Education Marketer, an insights consultancy firm based in the UK. I'm a big fan of Kyle's work and have been looking forward to this conversation. Let's jump right in. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, as always. I love talking to you in real life and on any podcast, any media. So here we go.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about how you're integrating AI into your work at Education Marketer?
Two ways primarily. In the nature of my business, it's an insights consultancy firm. So as a consultant, naturally, a tool as intelligent as like GPT-5 or whatever the equivalent people are using is an absolute business asset, especially for a small business. In terms of consulting work, it helps me analyze massive data sets in great detail and to do sales scale and very quickly. That's the value proposition of it. Most recently, I was helping a university trying to understand content gaps. Audits are very common in our sector, but it's sometimes very difficult to pull together those massive projects with all those disparate data points at speed. For this particular project, I exported all kind of social media data, whether it's in Excel spreadsheet format or whatever it is, and kind of combine that with what the university wanted to be known for and its brand values, its identity, and all that stuff that usually gets put in a drawer, and said, look, if you look at the audience that exists on these platforms versus the content that is published, is it meeting the values and the kind of things that the university wants to be known for? And the AI helped me identify to what percentage level content represented different things. And, it turns out that the university, while its content was getting traction, it just wasn't getting traction for the things that it wanted to be discovered and known for. One kind of core example within it was that the university wanted to have a role in, regional decisions and influence government policy at a local level. And the great irony was that a huge proportion of its audience on LinkedIn worked in those sort of roles where that sort of thing could be influenced, but they weren't speaking to them. I think out of the 2 years worth of data that I gathered and analyzed, only a handful of posts, like less than 12%, actually engaged with those issues. And in the past, I would have been able to determine that without AI. It just would have taken me weeks to go through the thing. So yes, you sense check it to make sure it's not making up stuff. The proposition there is just so strong. And I guess the other way I use it is to interrogate my thoughts and my point of view on things. You've seen me, I write a newsletter, I post content on LinkedIn, and AI helps me sort of understand the position I want to take on certain topics. And for that, I use a highly underutilized tool, in my opinion, which is Notebook LM. It's that tool that people might know better as the one that creates podcast content from documents. And for me, what I do is I essentially create like a manifesto of a point of view on a topic that I want to talk about in higher ed. I chuck it into that machine, and then I hear my thoughts discussed by two people so I can pick holes in it and maybe improve the arguments. And then I occasionally use that new feature they've got, which allows you to ring in and have the host be complimentary to you, or to have the host really be nasty to you and poke holes. And I have those sort of conversations. And I've been doing that for about 2 months now, and people might have noticed that my LinkedIn content has changed. It's more long form, it's more comprehensive, there's more references and data, and the arguments are much more solid. And I've noticed since doing it and putting my content through that machine, the traction, the engagement, and the business as a result of the back of it has improved. So AI, not really using it for content creation. I use it for the strategy element and in outputting content. So loving it. Fantastic tools, and can't wait to see where things go with it over the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hear of so many people, using it to create content for them. Like you said, I mean, those are missed opportunities because you should always start with your original thoughts and your original content and just use these tools to augment and amplify. And like you said, create that different perspective. I think those are better uses of these tools than just replacing our own creativity or our own thoughts on things. You are in the UK. You work mostly with UK institutions. What has your AI journey been like? Were you an early adopter? Were you hesitant about this technology at first? I know there's a lot of different perspectives in the UK. You have some regulations, which we don't have any in the US currently. How did you get into it?
I was an early adopter, definitely, but I don't want people to think I don't have any concerns. I really do. Firstly, how I adopted it was probably like most people. I tried it casually one day when it first came out, when it was ChatGPT 3. That was the big sort of unveil, and was hit by the shock and awe of seeing something of that quality like generate in front of my eyes. And since then, I've just kept playing with it and tried to integrate it into everything I do day to day. In terms of, I guess, my concerns, I've got two of them really. And the first is the education that young people receive around the technology. So there's no doubt in saying that this is an archetypal shift, right? It changes how we interact with problems on a daily basis. It changes in the future and now how businesses are created. Yet it's still treated in a curriculum, at least in the UK, as far as I can tell, as something that is separate, i.e., it is technology, belongs in the IT sort of lesson and that sort of suite. That's where you learn about it. And it's quite shocking to think about it. Like my son's 5 years old and he's in year one, so really early days in his educational journey. And he's telling me about his IT lessons where he will go to the computer room, which is separate from his learning environment. He'll sit down at a desktop computer where he'll learn how to use Microsoft Paint, learn how to use a mouse. And I'm listening to it and thinking, that's my experience as a child. This is what I did in the 90s. And in the meantime, you have this revolutionary technology that just transforms the way that you approach problems and learning. Now, think if you have like learning disabilities or challenges with words and how something like ChatGPT can help build those bridges. So I understand that there's certain things that younger individuals, like children, have to learn to do independent of these technologies, but to not have it integrated or even put a nod to it in the curriculum at an early age, it just seems insane to me. And secondly, I guess the other concern I have is around not so much the commoditization of content, because I think that's inevitability, but my main concern is for people who still think their content is the differentiator. Not that it ever really was. I think it's to do with the audience you build behind it. But now we live in an age where anything can be generated on a screen, whether it's via Sora 2 or you can generate content at least to 80% proficiency using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is. I think we need to really think about, A, how we build audiences, and or B, how we build the trust that an audience will have for an individual that's sharing the content. It feels much more of a problem of not what we create, but who's publishing it. And again, I don't think organizations in higher ed or any other industry really are kind of geared up to building those internal influencers and having them represent a brand. It's all very kind of logo first, content focusing on that, but there's no real things to grab onto. So lots of concerns really, but not necessarily on the regulatory front. It's just how the technology is taught and how people think about content creation going forward.
When you talk about how the technology is taught, not only to, the students, you have to teach the educators, you have to teach leadership, you have to teach the staff. Everyone needs education and awareness around these tools. If your PR team doesn't understand that your institutional leaders can be deep faked in a minute, they're not ready for what is going to be happening. And I think that is a real problem in in higher ed, certainly, but in all education organizations. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see for higher ed institutions when it comes to integrating AI, whether it's in the classrooms or whether it's within the administrative side of things, marketing, admissions? Why do you think higher ed is having so much difficulty realizing that this is something that needs to be addressed with some urgency?
From the marketing angle, and I think the learning and teaching ones maybe a little bit potentially more proactive in how they're changing things, integrating it into curriculum. And I've seen schools introducing how to use these technologies as part of degree experiences, things like that. On the marketing side, because that's what I'm most closely linked to naturally, I think the biggest challenge is what you spoke to. It's educating leaders on what this technology is. Because at the moment, it's definitely viewed as an assistant or a co-pilot. And I don't think that's the fault of higher ed. I think that's the fault of how the language is being adopted and being used by big players like Microsoft. It's positioned as a co-pilot, an assistant. It's never put in the driving seat. So it's like an extra layer. And that's reinforced when you go into like your emails in Google or you go into your Notion and everything's AI, use this AI, use this. It seems like this thing that's been bolted on top. When the kind of big win in all of this and the wake up moment for me was realizing that it's not an extra, it is core. It is AI first. And I know that sounds very strange coming from someone who makes a living out of their words and their content, but putting this tool at the center of what you're doing and starting with it, and then whether it's like vibe creating or whatever you want to refer to it, is a good first step. But the big unlock is kind of creating some sort of business engine with it. There's a company called Virtuous AI. The CEO is Chris Happ. And he speaks about the advantage of having a business AI that has access to your data, your pipeline, looking at where students are in the funnel, what they're doing, their behaviors. Because when a marketing leader then wakes up in the morning, they can go, tell me what is the health of my pipeline this week compared to where it was last month? And what are the actions for me to do today to take action against what is currently happening? Now, usually what you do is you go to your kind of key leaders in your team to get that information. There'll be a few days gathering the data, then you sit through a PowerPoint and all the data pulled together for you, then make a decision. But with a business AI that is plugged into all of this stuff, you can find that information out in seconds. Fast forward a few months and the thing can take actions for you and set up the meetings so you go to the right places in the right time. And this isn't science fiction, it's happening. These tools exist, they're just not being used in higher ed at the moment. So that greatest leap for me was like moving away from it just being assistant and thinking about, well, what happens when I reimagine the problems that I'm trying to fix every day with AI starting from scratch? And it's way easier for me to do as an individual and in a business, which is small compared to a university. But if you look at some university marketing teams, they're not big either. Now you can reimagine those processes. Or you can spend time doing the same thing we've always done. I've seen recently a web project speaking about how they cut down their number of web pages by half, which, great achievement. But maybe the solution wasn't that. Maybe the solution was developing an AI tool that could look at your content and assess the value and give the user an opportunity to find what's right for them. That's thinking AI first rather than going down the old routes of UX that we know. So, yeah. Understanding the core is the big thing for me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think most institutions or organizations are really looking at AI as ways to streamline their existing processes. And I think that cultural shift for an organization really comes when you start rethinking how you can reach your goals by collaborating with these tools instead of just doing the same workflows faster. You actually create entirely new workflows
Yep.
and ways of getting your jobs done.
It's referred to as the better trap, isn't it? So you just kind of improve on what you've got and you build on what you've got rather than going, this probably isn't fit for purpose now. Let's create something fresh and new and ready. And that is a big thing to bridge, because the whole push of higher ed is to be iterative and be better and to slowly improve the situation that we find ourselves in. But that's not the speed of student preferences and the way the industry is evolving. We need to move differently rather than quicker sometimes.
Thinking of that, what advice do you have for organizations, institutions that haven't started looking at AI as a solution?
Use the tools. Just use them for yourself in your person. And I know that, again, that sounds pretty obvious, right? But the number of times I've been involved in CRM projects where people want AI at the core and all that, and that's the senior message. And when you speak to those leaders about how they use AI day to day, they don't use it, or they don't use
Right.
it in a way that's aspirational to what they're trying to achieve with their own data. So the first thing is to use the tool, use it like a crazy person, integrate it in everything you're doing, replace Google. And probably that's not too difficult nowadays with ChatGPT or equivalent. I don't go to Google anymore. It's slow, it's cumbersome. AI is far, far, far superior. And the second thing is make sure you're reading the right stuff. There is so much content that's written by AI, and a lot of it floats around LinkedIn. And the stuff that gets traction is often the really simple and tactical stuff that's here today, gone tomorrow. The stuff that moves mountains and will be great for higher education is the long form, deep and invisible things that basically exist behind paywalls. I read two publications that are great. Exponential View, which is basically what it says on the tin. It looks at the long view in AI, the trends in AI, what's being developed, where the challenges are, how and what this means for organizations strategically. And I read a business publication called Category Pirates, which gives you all kinds of different ways to think about how AI can be integrated into business and to a distant business context. Both subscriptions cost around $250 a year. They're worth the weight in gold, honestly. If you haven't got one, just get one for your team now.
What are some of the more interesting use cases of AI that you've seen or heard of in higher ed?
Well, at the moment, I'm working with a school to build a new category of humanities qualification. We haven't decided on the language we'll use to describe it yet, but the problem is quite clear. We've seen degrees like English literature decline quite considerably in the UK since 2011. The number of applicants on that course or applying for those courses are down 50%, whereas more practical humanities qualifications like creative writing have absolutely soared. So there's definitely a bit of a gap here. So humanities are still popular, but practical humanities is popular. So at the moment, we're interviewing a lot of students who are interested in an arts or creative route in their future. And from those interviews, we're using AI to assess the type of language that they use to describe their problem. So when we design a solution, we speak their language. And again, when you look at the typical marketing campaigns and slogans that come out from universities, a lot of the language used often isn't the same language used as the people that they're trying to connect with. They feel overly polished, overly workshopped, if that makes sense. And it's not the natural language that comes out of people's mouths. So we're using AI to assess transcripts and work out the potential for how we talk about this new offer.
Yeah, I've done a lot of transcript and survey analysis with AI, and it's so good at finding themes that are prevalent throughout and associating, different ideas, categorizing them, bundling them in ways that would be so time consuming for us to
Yeah.
go through manually. So great use cases. Where do you see AI going in the next year or two, and what impact do you think that's going to have on higher ed institutions?
I can't remember the exact figures, but I think the intelligence of the current systems we're using, I think it doubles every 6 months. So my maths is correct. In 2 years' time, if we're using today as a starting point, it'll be 16 times more intelligent than it is in this moment. So that gives you pause, right? So if you can do all these
Hard to
things
imagine.
now, right? Yeah, yeah. What can you do with 16 times more the compute? And I don't have an answer to that, but I think it reveals that the way that we do things now, just kind of making slightly better improvements or thinking a little bit differently, isn't going to take us to where we need to be. I mean, the other thing I think people need to be considering is if this thing's 16 times more intelligent and we've seen the direction of the commoditization of content, what are you doing to hold on to that 20%, I guess, that makes you you, and makes you employable and marketable? And for me, that always comes down to building an audience, or at least kind of building some sort of traction about what makes you different. Because if the knowledge worker and that sort of archetype we've had for the last 50 years is essentially coming to an end, what replaces that? And for me, that's almost like a new a new square of understanding what a creative catalyst is, like someone who can create value, new meaning, new understanding. And that's a skill and a muscle that needs to be built. So the best way you can do that is to start, thinking about what extra you can offer, what makes you different, what value can you add when essentially every question or every bit of knowledge that ever has been shared can be extracted from these machines. Like, what is your perspective? Part of me thinks that universities are going to have a really good day with PhDs because that's where new knowledge is created. But when it comes down to like your typical knowledge worker and that career that we set in for life, I just don't think that future is sustainable. So looking at what new knowledge you can create and the way you talk about it, I think is really, really important going forward.
I think institutions that lean into knowledge transfer as a differentiator are going to really struggle because that's not going
Yeah.
to be something that you will want to pay for or commit, 4 years of your life to
No.
when you can just get it at the tips of your fingers. And I think it's really incumbent on institutions to start figuring out how we're going to be able to provide our students with something that's going to differentiate them, whether it's skills, whether it's embedded expertise in certain areas, or just, the understanding of where to go to find that information and how to work with these tools to be able to expand our own expertise and creativity. There's an opportunity for marketing and for admissions teams to start exploring the solutions that these tools create and then working with the rest of the institution, faculty, staff, students, to figure out how can we integrate these tools in a way that levels everybody up. Because it's not until you start having conversations with other people about how they're using the tools that you really start opening your eyes up about, oh, well, we could use that for marketing, even though, our business school is using that for academics. And I think having those different perspectives, having those diverse voices all contributing and those different unique applications, talking about those and having those conversations about those is the only way we're going to figure out like what we can really do with these tools because nobody really knows right now.
And then have all that knowledge available in your organization's AI.
Right. And then have it train. And I think being able to connect our siloed knowledge sources is going to be a huge unlock that these tools are going to, deliver to us. I think we're already starting to see that with some of the, MCP connections and opportunities, some of the different features that these tools are coming out with. Because right now, I mean, looking at your web traffic data and comparing that to your social data and your newsletter data is a nightmare of, trying to pull all these systems together into one big data lake or something. But if you could just give your secure, responsible AI tool access to all of that knowledge, it would be able to look at all of that data and say, here's what's working for your audience. Here's what's working for your institution.
And that's what we're talking about here. And I think a lot of people don't take note of. We're not talking about just chucking everything into Chat GPT. We're talking about a bespoke, protected AI environment that's only accessible to your staff and your people, and the different levels of access just that you would expect for any other system. And again, these technologies exist, but the thought of having to interact with an AI from a get-go and a starting point is quite daunting to people. It's like when the internet first came about, or it's like when first social media first came about. It's not something that you naturally do. It's the behavior that you introduce yourself to, then it becomes normalized over time. The CEO I spoke about earlier that looks after virtuous AI, he had a bit of a controversial way of phrasing it. I'm not sure I fully subscribe to his thinking, but I quite like it as a pitch. He essentially says to his employees, like, it's not about the skills that you bring as an individual. It's about how good you are talking to our AI. And then as a result of the knowledge you access, creating net new worth, revenue, whatever you want to phrase it. And I think actually, when you break that down, it's not a bad way to think about it. If you want to truly be an AI first organization and not just put it as something that's on the head of like your latest internal memo, it's definitely a new way to think about the problem.
One of the questions I always wrap up with are, what specific AI use cases are most useful and helpful to you, either personally or professionally?
Well, we've spoken a lot about the professional, I guess. I mean, Personally, I love video games, and I always had a desire to actually learn how to build one. So I'm using AI to understand how you do that, from narrative, storytelling, design. And I know this stuff's available online, but I don't know where to start. I need someone to help me through the process to understand all these sort of things, to specific, really basic questions and how it works. And similarly, I've always wondered what would happen if I had the opportunity to revisit old games I played in my youth, but they had sequels. What would those stories look like? And sometimes I find myself, rather than scrolling through social media, just asking ChatGPT, what if, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time had a trilogy associated with it or something like that? What would it look like? And it's funny to read what it comes back with because it seems quite plausible. But again, it's a time killer. It's just a bit of fun. And that's how people use AI too. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes.
Yeah, I love having conversations with it, and it just sparks new ideas and new perspectives that I had considered before. And especially when, you tell the tool, I want you to be intentionally problematic, or I want you to
Yeah.
play the devil's advocate. I want different
Yeah.
perspectives. It definitely opens up your mind to things.
Stop agreeing with me.
That's right. That's right. Kyle, I can't thank you enough for your time and for sharing your insights. If our audience wants to connect with you or follow you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Educationmarketer.co.uk, or just search me on LinkedIn. I'm there frequently.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. Kyle's insights reveal a fundamental shift happening in higher education marketing and beyond. It's the commoditization of content creation paired with the increasing performance of trust and authentic voice. His discovery that only 12% of content aligned with a university's strategic priority demonstrates how AI can expose uncomfortable truths about our institutional effectiveness. Kyle's perspective on thought leadership that goes beyond simple content generation is a fantastic approach that shows how AI can strengthen our strategic thinking rather than replace it. His observation that his content quality and business results improved after implementing this process validates the power of AI as an intellectual sparring partner. Kyle's concerns about education systems still teaching 1990s computing skills while ignoring transformative AI capabilities should serve as a wake-up call. As he points out, his 5-year-old son is learning Microsoft Paint in a separate computer room, the exact same experience Kyle had decades ago. Meanwhile, revolutionary technology that could help students with learning challenges or transform problem-solving approaches remains absent from curricula. Kyle's prediction that PhD and new knowledge creation will thrive while traditional knowledge worker preparation will struggle suggests that institutions need to fundamentally reconsider their educational models. The shift from asking what should we create to who's publishing it and why should anyone trust them represents a critical evolution in how we think about institutional communications. As Kyle notes, organizations aren't prepared for building internal influencers who can represent brands authentically in an AI saturated landscape. Please reach out to me with unique ways that you're integrating AI into your professional and personal lives. And as always, blue skies and keep creating.